This is the 3rd day of April, 1967. This is Guy Ross, and I'm in the home today of Mr. George M. Green, who was, for many years, an attorney for the Santa Fe Railroad. Mr. Green, why don't you begin with your...
I was born at Manhattan, Kansas on July the 13th, 1876. My father was a lawyer, and he was on the Supreme Court of Kansas for a number of years. I attended the State Agricultural College at Manhattan, and after spending 4 years in college, I was unable to get a job as a president of a railroad or a bank. So I had to go out and live with a brother who was a farmer. He sent me to hauling wood to town, which is about 10 miles. And one rainy day I was going in with a load of wood, and there was some snow on the road and it was pretty slick. There was a man walking along the road ahead of me with a few carpenter tools in a little box. I recognized him as Mr. Crutcher. He was the Chick Sales of Manhattan. And whenever he got a job of building a new privy, he set every member of the family down on a piece of paper, and he took a piece of chalk and he made a hole that fit everybody in the family. And I caught up with him and I said to Mr. Crutcher, "Don't you want to ride?" Well, he was halfway up on the road before I got through the invitation. And as we drove along, he said, "Your name is Green, isn't it?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "You went to school with my son Ambrose?" "Yes." "And you attended the State Agricultural College?" "Yes, sir." "And you graduated?" "Yes, sir." "And now you're able to haul wood?" In other words, he didn't believe in education. Had a big family, and all of the children went to work just as soon as he could get them to work. But that put me to thinking. I had a liberal education, and I was hauling wood, and I ought to do something better. So I got a job in the Rock Island locomotive shops at Horton, Kansas, and on the first day of January in 1896, I went to Horton as an apprentice boy. And they paid me 9 cents an hour. We worked 5 days a week, and we worked 8 hours a day, so I earned $3.65 a week. But I lived on it, and I lived well. And I stayed there until in the fall of '96, when I realized that I was on the wrong track. I had wanted to be a lawyer, and I had wheels in my head, and my father thought I'd make a better mechanic, I guess, than a lawyer. But anyhow, I came to Oklahoma, where my father had moved from Manhattan, and I arrived at Guthrie, Oklahoma in December, just a little while before Christmas of 1897. Guthrie was just a village. They had no pavements. Waterworks, the water was pumped from the Cottonwood River, and it is untreated. And everybody had a cistern. When we drank cistern water, and we used the water from the city to sprinkle the yard, and that was all it was fit for. And Asp, Cottingham, and Chartel were the leading law firm in Guthrie. Mr. Asp was the solicitor of the Santa Fe. And they had quite a large library. They had all of the books of the reporter system, and lots of textbooks. And we would go over there and borrow books and take them back, and I realized that they needed a boy to put the books away. So I would go over there every morning and put the books away, and Mr. S caught me at it one morning. And he said, "What are you doing this for?" And I said, "Well, Mr. S, I just want to get acquainted, and I'm studying law, and I wanted to see these books." Well, he said, "That's awfully kind of you, and we got some right-of-way that we are buying, and we'd like to have you buy some right-of-way." So I bought right-of-way for a branch line from Seward, which is south of Gusser, to Cashion, which is west of Gusser. And the Rock Island had built from Kingfisher into Cashion. Well, that didn't take long to buy that 7 miles of railroad, but one day he met me on the street and he said, "George, I tried the case over at Woodard, and Temple Houston is my local attorney, and I write to him to get me the record, and he don't reply." And somebody...
Was this the Temple Houston that was the son of Sam Houston?
Yes.
And
he was the 7th child, the last of the Houston tribe. And he had a partner by the name of Merrim and Houston. And they did a big practice, mostly criminal business. Well, I agreed to go, and he gave me a pass and agreed to pay my expenses and $5 if I came home with the record. I had met Mr. Temple Houston. I knew him by sight, and I had a letter of introduction. And I went to, when I arrived at Woodard, I stayed at Wichita the night before, and in the morning I left Wichita and I got down to Woodard in the afternoon along about 3 or 4 o'clock. And I found Temple Houston's office, and there was nobody there. And I stayed there until it got dark and nobody showed up. Well, I've been sent out to get the record, and I went out and I found the town marshal, and I said, "Where will I find Temple Houston?" Well, he said, "Over in the Cattle King Saloon. I saw him over there not over 15 minutes ago." Shortly before this incident, Temple Houston and Jack Love had killed one of the Jennings boys. Al Jennings became famous as a bandit and was a candidate for governor, and died in California recently. But anyhow, there was a lot of bad blood between the Houstons and Temple Houston, and the Houstons agreed that they were going to assassinate Temple Houston. Well, I found Temple Houston at the Cattleman Saloon, and there was 3 or 4 fellas there, and they were doing a lot of drinking, and they were pretty high. Well, I stood around there a little while, and finally wedged up and gave my letter of introduction to Temple Houston, and he read it, and he said, "Meet my friend here, Mr. Green, so and so and so, and we're all having a little liquor here together. Won't you have a drink with us?" Well, I had never taken a drink of whiskey. But the bartender paid to be that little jigger, and they down it, and I tried to, and I choked up, and I spit saloon whiskey on everybody in that saloon, and I thought I'd choke to death. I thought I'd swallowed a chain of lightning. But after a while, I got my breath. And after a while, he said, "Well, you fellas, I'm going to have to go to my office and get Mr. Green's record. And don't go away, I'll be back in just a little bit." He was a big man. He was over 6 feet tall, wore long hair, a Stetson hat, cowboy boots, a Prince Albert coat.
He was a real, like out of the comic book.
That's right. Well, it was then dark. But when we got to the office, he the door was shut and it wouldn't open. And immediately he turned around and he produced from somewhere, I don't know where, 2 pistols. And he said to me, "You lie down." And I laid down flat on the ground, and he straddled around over me and says, "Any fallen starts, you lie down." Well, he looked for this unseen foe, and he never showed up, and he finally says, "You follow me." Well, we dodged under the front window, and I was the next, close to him as the next second. When we went around behind the building, he says, "Now I'm going in that window." Says, "Here's one of these pistols, but if there's any fallen starts, you lie down." Well, I took the pistol and I laid down. He went and he pushed the window up, and we went in, and he said, "Now you give me that other pistol," and he disappeared. And he said, "You come in." Well, I just dove in there. He says, "Them Jennings thought they'd get the drop on me, but they didn't do it." Said, "I'll look around here and see what's going on." He went and looked around, and finally he lighted a match, and in this confusion on this desk, out came with this record. He says, "Now we'll go out the way we came in." Says, "You're not going to go with me. You're going to go to your hotel, and you go to bed." And said, "I'll go first, and you follow me 300 or 400 feet, but as any fallen starts, you lie down." Well, I went back to the hotel. When I come to go to bed, I found that my pants were wet, and it wasn't perspiration. Well, some cowboys rode through the streets that night and shot the light out of the office of the hotel. I got a train out of Woodard at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was glad to get away from there. It's a little cow town. And I presented Mr. Asp with the record, and he gave me the $5 and paid my expenses. I studied law 4 years in my father's office, and a committee of 3 men, including the district judge, Judge Burford, Judge Dale, and Judge Houston, all examined me, and they took about half a day of doing it with another boy, and I was admitted to the bar on March the 10th, 1900. In 1905, Mr. Asp broke up his firm. Johnny Shartell came to Oklahoma City, which was a growing town. And Jim Cottingham, who was one of the trial lawyers for the Santa Fe, resigned. And Mr. Asp employed Charlie Woods and me to take Mr. Cottingham's place. And he agreed to put me on the payroll on the first day of March. It was about the 1st of February. I said, "Mr. Asp, I'll be over to your office in the morning and go to work, and I'll work till I get my pay." And I worked a month without any pay. And Mr. Woods was Assistant Attorney General, and he couldn't get away until the 1st of March. That's why that date was fixed. But I started in trial work probably the next day. There weren't many cases pending, but anyhow, I started in as an assistant attorney. And I got $100 a month, and I had been earning about maybe $25 or $50 a month. And I was glad to get it, and I had more money then than I had for a number of years afterwards. And we got statehood in 1907. And our Mr. Bledsoe represented the Gulf, Colorado in Santa Fe, and had an office at Ardmore. And Mr. Lathrop, who was Jones solicitor in Chicago, wanted to consolidate the office. And he proposed to Mr. Carn and Mr. Bledsoe that they form a partnership. And Mr. Bledsoe came to Gusser on the 1st day of August in 1908. And in 1910, why, we concluded to move the office from Guthrie to Oklahoma City. In 1915, there was an explosion at Ardmore of a casing-head gas tank car that 2 cars were shipped from the refinery. I've forgotten where they came from, but anyhow, they arrived in Ardmore on September the 13th, a hot, humid day in September. These 2 cars were overloaded, and the safety valves would lift and the gas would escape, and they made a good deal of noise. And they stayed there through Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and on Monday morning while the switch crew went to work, and they moved 1 car to the refinery. When they came back, the other car was cutting up so bad that they were afraid to move it, so they sent up to the refinery to a man to come down to take care of it. He got up on the car, and they had a 2x4, and he tried to unscrew the dome cap. But he couldn't do any good with it. It was set too tight, and he went off and got a crowbar and a sledgehammer. And he unscrewed that safety valve, and immediately that gas came out in the nature of fog. It was a liquid in the car, but the minute the air struck it, it became a gas. And it rolled out on the ground, and the first light it came to, it set off an explosion. The passenger depot was blown down. The freight house was set on fire and burned up. There was a freight train in there had 35 cars loaded with ties, and about half of them were tipped over. There were 39 people killed, and the hospital had over 400 people injured. It broke window lights for 12 blocks, and the town was at a standstill. I was sent down there, and I got there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and there was a crowd of people working at a building over on the east side. There was a colored pool hall in an old frame building, and on the west side of it was a 2-story stone building. The explosion was near this stone building, and it took the second story off and set it down on the pool hall. There were 13 dead Negroes in there, and they got one nigger boy out from under the pool table, and they dusted him off, and he just left. Well, in a few days, Mr. Ripley, who was president of Santa Fe, sent for Mr. Cottingham and Mr. Bledsoe and the general manager from Topeka and Galveston to come to Chicago. They took me along. We went in to see Mr. Lathrop, or Mr. Lathrop, who was Jones solicitor, but he was out of town. And we went in to see a man by the name of Robert Dunlap, who was a general attorney and a very profound lawyer. Mr. Ripley didn't come down till about 11 o'clock, but we told Mr. Dunlap all we knew about, and he finally announced that Mr. Ripley would see us, so we went in to see Mr. Ripley. And he said, "Well, gentlemen, we have a situation at Ardmore that's very disturbing." He said, "I understand that the business has just been ruined. Mr. Bledsoe used to live there, and he has a lot of friends live there. And We explained to him about how the explosion occurred and what occurred and one thing and another. And finally Mr. Dunlap says, Mr. Lathrop, I have talked with these gentlemen about the facts, and from what they tell me, I don't believe there's a legal liability. Mr. Ripley had a habit of taking a lead pencil and turning it in his hands, and he said, Mr. Dunlap, we're not going to consider this on a legal liability. We've got a moral obligation, and we're going to keep it. Said, now I want you men to go back down to Ardmore and have the Chamber of Commerce set up an arbitration committee. And any claim that we cannot settle ourselves, we'll submit it to the arbitration committee of their choice, and we will pay that amount. Well, it raised my opinion of Mr. Ripley. It is a human being. And we paid over $1 million. We had at one time 22 claim agents, men that knew the hardware business, men that knew the clothing business, men that knew the jewelry business, and the lumber business, and all of that business, and we would meet at night and assign claims to men that knew what was involved. And we settled and paid out over $1 million. There were only 2 claims submitted to the arbitration committee, and the arbitrators gave them less money than we had offered. Now that was a pretty human thing to do. And I think that Santa Fe established a good reputation from just that one episode. Now, we had a lot of other lawsuits, but that was an outstanding situation. The explosion occurred in the air. Buildings were blown down. Westheimer and Dobby had a department store. There was less than a block from where this explosion occurred. It was a 3-story building. The roof was pulled in. Their stock was ruined. We finally paid them $65,000 for damages to the building and to their stock.
How long did all these transactions take?
How long?
Yeah.
Oh, I was down there 6 months. I don't know how long, but I would go down there Monday morning and come home Saturday night and get a clean bath and a clean shirt and be back down there Monday morning. And I was down there for 6 months settling claims. And we had claims after that, so of course. We had one lawsuit at Dallas. He sued us in Oklahoma and Dallas. He was an operator for the Santa Fe, and he wasn't on duty at the time, but he was out in his yard, and his leg was broken. And they set it, but they didn't get the bones in juxtaposition. And they finally took him back there, took him to Temple, and reset that leg. And after he brought this lawsuit, he went to bed and let his hair grow and his whiskers grow, and he looked like Jesus Christ picture than any man that I ever saw.
Huh.
And a man by the name of, I've forgotten his name, Charles K. Lee tried the case for the Santa Fe, and I went down there to watch the trial because I had a case in Oklahoma. And they tried that case about 2 weeks. And the doctor testified that his leg was about 3 inches shorter than the left leg, which was not the broken leg. The right leg is broken. Well, Mr. Lee on cross-examination said, now, doctor, you have known me. Oh, yes, sir, I've known you a long time. How many cases have you represented plaintiff? Well, he counted about 100. Did you ever testify for the defendant? Never have. Always been for the plaintiff. Well, said, now, Mr. Doctor, you have testified that this man's heart was affected by it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What is the natural pulse? 76. Will you feel my pulse and tell me what it is? 76. Now, doctor, is there any way that I can increase my pulse? Yes, by taking nitroglycerin, for instance. Well, he asked him some more cross-examination. He said, doctor, will you take my pulse now? With 85 now. Well, he asked him, he got it up to 95. Well, they put this fella on the table and they measured in front of the jury his leg, and it was 3/8 of an inch shorter than the other leg. He tried to draw his leg up, but he couldn't do it. Well, the jury awarded him a verdict of, I think, $77,200. He got a check from the Santa Fe for that amount. He took it to the bank, got the money, got on the train and left, and didn't pay his lawyer. And I don't know what ever become of him, but anyhow, we had a number of cases that were of interest. We had one case where it occurred in Kansas. At Oxford, Kansas, a truck loaded with gasoline collided with a freight train. There were 3 men on the diesel locomotive, and they were all badly burned, and they would have burned to death, but the train was derailed, and the units went into the Arkansas River, and they put the fire out on these men. 19 cars were burned up, including the units. A fellow by the name of Ratner, who had been governor of Kansas, had served his term, and he went into the damage suit business. He brought a suit for the driver and the owner of the gasoline in the truck in federal court in Oklahoma. I was assigned the lawsuit to try it. We discovered that the driver of the gasoline truck had one eye that was blind. The Interstate Commerce Commission made rules and regulations in regard to interstate commerce movements, and provided that a man driving a gasoline truck had to have vision in both eyes. And then there were some other features that were very enjoyable to the defense of the lawsuit. The law of Kansas was very favorable to the railroad companies. After we'd had this lawsuit and had studied it and made up our minds to try it and defend it, a lawyer came into my office here in Oklahoma City, and he said, Mr. Green, I have been employed by Lloyd's of London to try and negotiate a settlement with you for this explosion. I would like to settle it for $25,000. I said that wouldn't be enough. Well, he said, what will you take? I said, I'll have to and go to Chicago and talk to my boss about it. So I went to Chicago, and I talked with everybody that listened to me, and they finally agreed that I could sell it for $125,000 if they would agree to pay these three men, the engineer, the fireman, and the brakeman, who were badly burned. The engineer's left shoulder was badly injured, and it is doubtful whether he'd ever be able to run a locomotive again. And we finally agreed on a settlement of that lawsuit for $125, and they paid each of those men $10,000 apiece. Now that's about the...
Are there, what would you say would be the outstanding things in the development of the railroad?
Well, when I went with the Santa Fe, it was just two tracks of rust, unbalanced. If they made 30 miles an hour, they were doing good.
Was it just a north-south line?
North and south line is all it was. You see, Indian Territory, the railroad was built in 85 and 86 and 87. It was Indian Territory. There was nobody living in this country at that time. And until 89, when the country was opened up, it was still in that condition. And it was from Galveston, and they only had a train one way each way a day. One in the morning and back in the afternoon. But it wasn't long, and it was laid with 65-pound rail, as I recall. And it was relayed in Oklahoma shortly after I came to work in Santa Fe in 1904 with 90 pounds. And ballast was put on, and at one time we had 8 trains, 4 each way in Oklahoma City. Now we got 2. No, we got 4 now. We had 8. 8 at one time.
What were there any particular things that were responsible for the growth of the Santa Fe that you know about?
Oh, well, it was just natural, of course, for the country to grow. For instance, Guthrie and Oklahoma City were about 10,000 population apiece when I went to work for the Santa Fe. But Oklahoma City got the Frisco Railroad and the Katy Railroad, and Guthrie didn't get the Frisco, and Oklahoma City got the growth. Guthrie's about 10,000 now, and Oklahoma's over 300,000, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm wondering, how did the Santa Fe come to be in Oklahoma in the first place?
Well, the Santa Fe, after the Civil War, in about 69, built from St. Joe to Topeka. And they expanded, and they finally got to Santa Fe, New Mexico in 85. And in 85, well, there were a lot of railroads built. And they built in Oklahoma and Kansas and New Mexico and Arizona and California. And they built down to Arkansas City. It got to Arkansas City in 85, at the end of the line. They then extended on to Ponca City, and then in 1994, Congress passed two acts, one for the Gulf, Colorado, and Santa Fe, and the one for the Atchison and Topeka and Santa Fe Railway Company, giving the grant the right-of-way through Indian Territory, Oklahoma. And that's when the railroad was started, and the Gulf, Colorado, and Santa Fe started at Galveston, and they got up to in Texas, and they agreed to get to Purcell in April in 1897, and they arrived there just a few days before the time limit that they were to get there. And they had a big party. They got the jug out, and everybody got tight, I expect.
The railroads must have played a key role in the settlement of all these unassigned lands.
Oh, all this western country. Now, when I came to Oklahoma, they built the eastern Oklahoma, we built the western Oklahoma, we built from Pauls Valley up to Newkirk, and there were other lines of the Santa Fe that they started to build the western Oklahoma from Woodard to Gusser, and they graded down as far as Sealing and built part of the line. Now, the Gusser and Western is abolished, it's gone. And the Pauls Valley line is taken up from Shawnee to Pauls Valley, or nearly to Byers. There was one other incident that I enjoyed with the Santa Fe. Before I went on the payroll, Mr. Ass met me on the street and said, Mr. Dunn is our chief engineer in Chicago, and he wants some boy that's a stenographer to go with him. He wants to go over the line that is now located from Newkirk to Pauls Valley. And he wants a boy to take notes. And you're a stenographer, and I said, well, a kind of one. Well, he said, I think you can do. I'll give you $50 a month, and they'll keep your board, and any expense I'll pay you that. And he will be at Newkirk, and you're to meet him there on a certain day. Well, I took the job. Mr. Asp had gone to Arkansas City, and he hired a liverman, and the line had been located by Mr. Burke, who was city engineer here in Oklahoma City, and he looked like John Fields. He had a Van Dyke beard. And Mr. Asp had hired this liverman, and we had a chuck wagon, and we had a boat on the wagon, and we had a tent, and we had a surrey with fringe on top, and we had a man that hunted and fished, and he brought in game, and I slept with Mr. Dunn in a tent with him, and I had a barrel of water and a tub, and we'd wash our feet at night. In the morning, the team was hitched up to the surrey and would take us out to where we quit the night before. And Mr. Dunn had me on his left side, and he'd say, take the notes. On a certain we stirred up a flock of quail estimated to 36. And we saw deer, and we saw raccoons, and I had my typewriter, and in the night I wrote those notes out and whatever other stuff. And he'd get up in the night, and we'd light the Coleman light, and he'd dictate some more stuff. And he'd work about 2 weeks, and then he'd have to go back to Chicago, and then I'd meet him wherever he said, and we'd go over. Then we about 3 months And I walked from Purcell, or from Newkirk to Paul's Valley with those three men. We'd take us out in the morning in the Surrey, and then we would walk, and they'd come and get us at night, and they'd take us where we left off the night before.
Quite an experience. Were there any particular problems in the railroad securing land or securing the right of way?
No, if you couldn't buy it, we would condemn it. Over at Tulsa, they built in there. Mr. Ash took me over there in 1905 to buy in my name the right of way. He'd had the land appraised by some real estate men, and I had that information and the names of the people that owned the land. Well, I bought all of it, and there was one family lived near where the Midland Valley Railroad depot is, by the name of Pound. They were Germans. And I went to the Pounds and told them that I was buying property for investment, and I wanted to buy their property. Well, they said they didn't want to sell it. The house was built by their son, and he was in heaven, and it was sacred property, and they were going to live there till they die, and they had the best well of water in town, and I wouldn't sell it. Well, I reported that to Mr. Asp, and he said, well, go back and tell them that the railroad is building in there, and that you're buying it for the railroad, and if you can't buy it, you'll condemn it. So I went back, and the woman was the spokesman of the old fellow. He had a little garden, a beard, and he didn't say anything. He was just as expressionless as a loaf of bread. So I told Mrs. Pound that I had come back and I would offer them so much money for my property, and if they didn't take it, I would have to condemn it. And I told them what condemnation was. She took me by the piece of the back of my neck and the seat of my pants and put me out of the property and said, don't you come back. If you ever come on the railroad, I hope it runs off and you're killed. Well, that was rather a sudden way of ending, and then I was down that way one day and I saw an old fellow go in there with a Prince Albert coat and a big black hat on, and I thought, well, now he is the preacher. So I waited until he came out and followed him, and he was a German Lutheran preacher. I went to see him. And I said, I am George M. Green. I am representing the Santa Fe. And the Santa Fe are building into this country, and they're going to develop Tulsa, and the town's going to grow. And I wanted to buy the Pounds property, and they won't sell it. Said their house is built by their son, and it's sacred, and they're going to live and die. And I said, now you could do them a great service. I'll give them the house. They can take it off. They can take everything they want on it. And I'll pay them a liberal price. He said, Mr. Green, you meet me down at the Pounds tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock, but don't tell them about that we have met before. So at 2 o'clock, I knocked on the door, and Mrs. Pound came out, and when she saw me, she said, you get out of here! You get out of here! And she started after me, and I held the door shut, and the preacher came to the door and said, what's going on, Sister Pound? This man trying to steal our property. Well, he said, who are you? And I said, I'm George M. Green. I represent the Santa Fe. And it's building into Tulsa, and we're going to do the town a great deal of good. And I'll pay these people a price that they can go and buy 5 acres of ground, and they'll have more ground than he's got now. He lives on this little garden that he raises. Well, he said, now, Sister Pound, send for Mr. Pound. So he came in and washed on the roller towel and threw the water on. came in and sat down, and the preacher said to him, Mr. Pound, this is Mr. Green. He represents Santa Fe, and they're building in Tulsa, and they're say that they're going to do the town a great deal of good. And they want to buy this property, and he says that it'll pay you enough that you can go 5 or 7 or 10 acres of ground. And I think that I know where you can buy a tract of ground that would answer your purpose, and you can take the house off and keep it. Well, after we argued a little bit, they agreed to take the money. I went up to town and I got the deed and came down with the cash, and I gave it to him, and took a notary along, and we got it acknowledged, and I said, now this winds it up, and we'd like to have you get off the property within 60 days. And the preacher said, Mr. Green, if you don't mind, I'll go along with you. So we walked along, and I agreed to pay him for his services. And I agreed that I'd pay him whatever he thought was right. When he got around the corner, I said, now, how much should I owe you? You did me good service. He said, how about $15? I said, how would $25 suit you? She said, well, that would be better. So I gave him $25, took his receipt. I forgot to tell you, he finally, when Mr. Pound came in, he said, now let's ask the Lord to help us. And he said, let us pray. And we all got down and kneeled down, and I got off one knee to another, and he prayed long and long and loud for the Lord to help us in solving this great problem. They wanted to do the right thing, and they could take the property off, the house off, which was of sentimental value, and I think that did the work.
Let me lawsuit now?
Yeah. At Perry, during territorial days, we had a little lawsuit for overflow, and there was a liability. Henry Johnson, who was governor, was attorney for the plaintiff, and he was a thorn in our side. And I tried to settle with him, but he said, I'm going to make you pay in this lawsuit. Well, I couldn't settle it, but said, we tried it, and you had a jury of 6, and they had to be a unanimous verdict. And I had an old fellow on the jury that every recess that he'd go by me, he'd put his hand on me, and I thought he was just studying himself. But I got through with the lawsuit, and I went to the jury along in the afternoon, and the jury was out quite a while, and I went back to Guthrie where I lived, and I got on the train the next morning, was back up at Guthrie, and I went to the courthouse, and the bailiff said, "Well, George, the jury came in with a verdict for you last night." I said, "What?" "Yes, they decided for you." Said, "Mr. Towsley, one of the jurors, wants you to come down to see him." I said, "Who is he?" "Well, he's one of the jurors. He had a little broom factor down here." So I went down to see him. And he was making a broom, sitting on a bench and sewing a broom. When he said, "Georgie, I'm awful glad you came," said, "I had a terrible time with that lawsuit." Said, "When I went out, all of those men wanted to sue the verdict for the railroad government, against the railroad government." Said, "I just couldn't decide this case against you." Said, "I just stood there and fought them and tried them and finally brought them around, and they finally decided the way I wanted." Says, "You know, me and your pa were messmates in the army, and I just couldn't decide that case against you."
Had a little help there.
Yeah. Yeah.
What kind of a lawyer was Henry Johnston?
Well, he was a pretty good lawyer. He usually could win, but you got one, he could never understand how he lost that lawsuit. I told him about 7 years afterwards. It wasn't right for the fella to do that way. And my father was gone, but he was in the same regiment, not in the same company as my father from Ohio.
Were there any problems with the railroad securing labor back in these Indian territories or anything?
Oh, no, they hired men. In those days, if a man earned $1 a day labor, he was doing well, you know. And the section men only got $1 a day for a while.
Never was any hostility or anything? Was there any hostility over the land coming through in Indian territory or later on?
No.
Oh,
there were some. Well, on the eastern Oklahoma, there was one fella that got out a shotgun and wasn't going to let the railroad company come over. I had a case over at Bartlesville.
What happened?
When they built the line over there, I bought the right of way for that line. And there was a fellow by the name of, I've forgotten now his name, but I may think of it. But he was a ranchman. And we had to condemn it. We tried to buy right away, but he wouldn't talk to you. He just wasn't going to have a railroad on his land. And we had commissioners appointed in the federal court, and he told those men, he said, "Now don't go on that land, it's mined with nitroglycerin. I've got 175 quarts of nitroglycerin buried on the right of way." Well, I didn't believe the story, but Mr. Man who owns a building here now, his dad that owned it, was the contractor. Said to George, "I've got a contract to build this railroad, and my subcontractor's afraid to go on that right of way." Well, I said, "Now I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll ask Judge Cottrell to issue an order to bring this man in and see if he's got nitroglycerin." So we had a hearing before Judge Cottrell, and he testified that there was 176 quarts of nitroglycerin buried in the right-of-way. Judge Cottrell, who was hearing the case, stopped the proceeding right there. Said, "Mr. Marshall, come in here. Take this man in charge and take him to Muskogee, Oklahoma, and there's a man over there that is in charge of explosives. It's a government employee, and have this man dig up that nitroglycerin and deliver it to this government man. Well, that was just down my alley. The next morning, the lawyer that represented this ranchman said, George, I want you to come over to the hotel. My client wants to talk with you. So I went over to the hotel. I still can't remember that man's name. But anyhow, I went in and George Labadie was the lawyer. A young lawyer and a good fellow. He said, Bill, tell Mr. This fellow said, Mr. Green, I have lied in this lawsuit. There's no nitroglycerin buried in this right-of-way. Well, I said, I can't do anything for you. Judge Cockrell has got you now, and now you've admitted you committed perjury. And he said, well, there's no nitroglycerin there. Said, I've just been making a mistake by telling you that, and I want you to know it. So I came away. There was a lawyer up at the Pawhusker at that time, John, I've forgotten his name. You get old, you forget names. But he came down and he succeeded in letting Judge Cockrell just dust this fellow off, and after a while, this contractor said, George, this fellow is still claiming that this right-of-way is mined with nitroglycerin. I said, we'll go to Pawhuska and we'll go over to his ranch tomorrow morning, and I want you to go. So we went over there, and he lived in Bartlesville, and after a while we heard this car coming, and he had a fella with him. And they got out of the car quite a ways from where we stopped our car. And the other fella, one of them stayed by the car, and he had both hands in his pocket. And the contractor said, they're going to kill you, George, going to kill us, going to kill us. I said, I don't think so. I don't think so. Well, he came up to us, and he said, I said, now, mister, this is Mr. Contractor. He wants to know whether or not there's any nitroglycerin in this right-of-way, and he would like to camp down there in this low ground, and he would like to get water from your well, and you got a line down there to a trough. He says, come down there and I'll show you where you can camp, and there's no nitroglycerin there. So we got out of that mess.
Well, you've witnessed, I guess, the change in emphasis in the railroads from passenger service to freight.
Oh yes,
service.
The passenger business, of course. At one time they had a passenger train on the eastern Oklahoma that ran from Newkirk to Paul's Valley, and they did the big business. But the automobiles came along paralleled, and it took the business all away from the railroads.
Do you think what do you see in the future for the railroad industry?
Well, now, the passenger business on the Santa Fe is good. If you go down to the Santa Fe station at 3 o'clock in the morning, when it goes north, you'll see the station full of people. And if you go down there at 6 o'clock, well, you'll see the station full of people when it's going in the other direction. And they have seven chair cars on that train, and they run practically full.
You think there's still a future for the railroad in passenger business?
I do. They're doing a good passenger business to California. The through business is going to be good, But the local business is all gone. Man, if he wants to go 100 miles, he goes in his automobile or by bus. He saves him time.
Do you think the railroad's going to have to change strategy in any way?
Well, the railroad is like other business. We have progressed. We're trying to increase the speed. We're trying to give the passenger more service and better service. And they're working on that now. France is running passenger trains at 150 miles an hour. And they're trying to do it in the United States. And they'll accomplish it.
Well,
it's progress. And with the Santa Fe are keeping up with it, I think. We're big and better freight equipment now. Bigger cars, bigger power. We used to operate 5 diesel units on these passenger trains. They have new big power, and there are 3 units now. That more power than the 5.
The change in power, I guess, from the steam engine to the diesel and so forth has probably made a big
oh yes,
difference.
The diesel has been a wonderful thing for reducing speed or making better speed. And they're in the steam locomotive operating in Oklahoma, I don't believe.
All gone. Well, this has been a very good interview. I appreciate you doing it.
Yeah.
Any final?
I built a miniature locomotive. You ever seen it out the fairground?
No. Well, I don't know if I have or not.
Well, it's in the Arts and Science Department. It's 7 feet long, built on a scale of 1 inch to the foot, and it runs.
Well, I knew you'd done that because I read it in the paper.
Yeah.
And it's out at the fairground.
Yeah. There's been an exhibition in the station here, in the Liberty National Bank, the Citizens National Bank, and the First National Bank.
How long did it take you to build it?
18 years.
18 years?
Yeah, I gave it to my grandson. He wants me to build him a diesel now, but I'm not going to do it.
It must have been awful tedious work building that thing to scale like that.
Yeah. Well, you see, I learned in the locomotive shop how to do that.
Where'd you get the equipment and so forth?
Oh, I got a lathe. I'll show you my shop. You
Okay.
better come see. There were no ties were all local wood, and there's no ballast. Traffic, no doubt, was very slow at first, but it wasn't long until it was discovered that the business was increasing, and the new rail would have to be replaced. The 75-pound rail was replaced the 65-pound. And as business increased, we went to 85 pounds, and when Mr. Egger was superintendent of the Oklahoma Division, he laid a 90-pound rail, and the first ballast was placed on the track at that time. And that was the last word in the construction of a railroad. But the rail has increased constantly, has increased in civilization and this business required. And we finally got to 120 pounds. And then 136 pounds, and that is where the welded rail comes in. The welded rail was welded in lengths of 30 feet each into a quarter of a mile tractor, and this was all moved in on flat cars and pulled off of the cars and laid beside the old rail, and the old rail was removed and the new rail put down. But there was defective rails. Before the welded rail came into existence. And there was a car that was called the detective car that was a lot of electric equipment in it, and it would go over the line and detect where the defects were. And it would spray a squirt of oil on the place where the defective were, and that rail would have to be taken out of service and a new rail placed to take its use. I presume that the new welded rails are detected before they are welded. That part of the story can be completed by somebody who knows the history of the welded rail. But if somebody will develop the facts, the man that suggested it or patented it, give him his dues, give him his name, and give the mechanics of how the wheels are welded and placed. There's another our cards, so this the trains in the old days were handled by an operator who had a division, and he gave the train crews, before they started out on their runs, a clearance, and where they would meet certain trains going in both directions, and a slow orders. And the telegraph operator at every station where the train stopped would have to give the new orders maybe, and that was quite a cumbersome job of handling trains. Then they developed a central traffic control. An operator controlled every train. He had a board that showed where the trains were, and they were shown by a light as they moved. And he could open and close switches and pass trains, and without any train orders. The men were advised by a signal that was in their engine that they were going to meet a train. And it increased the handling of the trains and increased the opportunity of wrecks and hazards of that character. And I hope that somebody who is familiar with this part of the traffic control will tell the story and put it in print. The railroads in the early days were by men were big men and little engines, and they were really big men, and they had an object in view where they would build. There was no civilization in Oklahoma when it was built. It is a desolate country. There was only a few Indians and some cowboys. And they didn't furnish any business, except it was in the spring of the year, there was a great lot of Texas cattle moved. And there was quite a space of time between the railroad was built in 1885 and 86, or 86 and 87, and when the Santa Fe was built, no, when the territory was opened in 1889. And these people who settled in Oklahoma didn't have any business. They came here and settled on homesteads and improved up on their land. And with lumber shipped in and other hardware and groceries and things of that kind. And there was a lull of a period from 86 to 89 that there was no business except a seasonable cattle business. A track walker had to be a man who had some judgment. As I stated, he carried a lot of plunder that he had to use, and if he found the track washed out, he would have to get to the operator to advise the chief operator that the line was washed out. And he'd have to get somewhere on the other side of the washout. Maybe he could go back somewhere and go across on a bridge. He'd have to do his best to warn the traffic on the railroad of the conditions that existed. And in those days, it was a hazardous business. As I stated, the equipment was light. It was the days of the link and pin couplers. The automatic coupler didn't come until several years after the railroads were first built. And a brakeman had to go between the cars to couple and uncouple the cars. And it was a hazardous occupation. And many men lost their lives or limbs in coupling or uncoupling cars. In the old days, you would see a train conductor that had several fingers, or maybe the right hand was gone, showing that he was a brakeman and lost his limb in coupling cars or uncoupling. It was difficulty. Some of the cars were higher than the other cars, making a difference of say 6 or 8 inches, a difference in the height of the couplers. And this was a dreadful hazard to handle this situation. And it was done by a longer length. And most of the locomotives had on the rear end of the tender a 2 or 3 pockets for the lick to go into, so as to meet the requirement of higher cars or lower cars. A track walker told me this story, that on the one section of one day when he was inspecting the track, he found that a great number of the nuts had been taken off of the bolts and the spring washers removed. There was a school straight by, and his track walker went to the sheriff, told him of the condition, and said that he thought that the boys of the school must have taken the bolts off. The sheriff went to the school and he got the boys all together. He said, "Now you have created a great hazard. I don't know who did it, but some of you did. You removed those washers, which are necessary to keep the track in shape. You don't realize what you've done. Now I want those washers brought back, and by tomorrow morning I'll be back here, and if those washers are not in a can that I'm going to place at the end of the section house, I'll come and I'll take some of you into jail." The next morning the washers were all back, and the trackmen put the track back in shape. And I don't know, the teenagers we've had with us all, and probably always will have. But I think that the teenagers should be taken care of at home. The fathers ought to know what his boy is doing. My father knew what I was doing. I got in some difficulty when I was a boy, and my father asked me about it, and I told him the truth. Well, he said, "I'm not going to punish you because you told the truth, but I should have known what you were doing. Now, I'm not going to punish you, but you're going to school us out. You're going to remain in this yard unless your mother gives you permission to go out." He bought me a baseball and a bat, and we played baseball, we played marbles, and he took an interest in me. And I think if the fathers of this country would pay more attention to what their boys are doing, the teenagers would get along better. live in a troubled world. I don't know. I've got faith in America. I believe we are going to come out of it some way. It's easy to criticize, but I believe that we ought to support our president regardless of where or what party he belongs to. We have congressmen and senators now that are criticizing the president. And it's easy to criticize, but I believe that they ought to support our president, and then we can solve our problems by, instead of an encouragement, under the criticism that the senators and congressmen are giving. I was in the law department 52 years. I was in my 52nd year when I retired. I gave the Santa Fe the best I had. My heart has always been with the Santa Fe and is still with the Santa Fe. The growth of the Santa Fe has been marvelous. It's increased from the 52-pound rail to the welded rail. It's the last word in the construction of a railroad track. When it is laid, new ties are usually placed in the track. They're sawed, they're 9 feet long, and they are paraffin. They're what's the word I want to use? When you get old, you can't always remember things like you should. One, two, three, four, five, six, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That somebody will describe how they take care of the expansion and contraction. Riding over a welder rail is like sitting in a rocking chair, and you hardly know that you're moving until the train gets to be in motion. It's a great advancement. And another period of advancement was the elimination of the steam locomotive and the diesel engine. I hope that the management will get somebody to tell this story. The old steam locomotive was a wonderful machine. And the Santa Fe had some wonderful engines. Some of them are on display in parks and fairgrounds. We had a lot of locomotives that passed through Oklahoma and went down into history. The first locomotives that I remember were odd numbers, 57s, 80s, and every engine had an engineer, and that was his, nobody else running. And he took great pride in keeping it up, and the firemen helped him. They'd spend hours polishing it up so it would look its best. But the steam locomotive got so that it wasn't big enough for the passenger service. And in order to start, the engineer had to back up and make some slack. And he started his engine by opening the throttle, and he would reach you in your seat and almost throw you out of your seat by starting by yanking it, as they call it. But it was the only way he could get a long train started. But that don't occur now in the diesel. It's just a wonderful, it's constant power. It's pulling all the time. And they start trains and pull trains of huge length and weight. Keep your eye on the Santa Fe. It's going to come back. The stock market is improving, and they'll have dividends declared, and people will be happier. We live in a troubled world, but I have faith, and I know that we're going to come out of our troubles. I thank you.